Domain and range is one of those topics that causes a lot of confusion and frustration with students, but it doesn't need to be that way. The first thing we want to look at with domain and range is what those two things are referring to. So if we're looking at domain, domain is the input of a function or we could look at it as the x value So really we're just looking to see what can we plug into our function. And then range would be the output of a function or the y value. So with any function, we're putting something in and we're getting something out. So the x value is looking along the x-axis. So let's just say we have a straight line. So we're looking at a linear equation, and with domain, we're looking along the x-axis. And if we copy this over, the range, we're looking at the y-axis. So we want to see what happens when we plug something in and what happens when we get something out. So the default domain for a function in general is going to be all real numbers or negative infinity to positive infinity. So that is any x value, positive, negative, or 0 that you can plug in. So if we're looking at a linear equation, we want to see what we can plug into the x value and whether or not there's any restrictions. So if we start at 0, we can plug 0 in, and we can see that here because we have a point along our line when x is 0. And then if we go to infinity or negative infinity to the left, do we have points? So as the graph is going infinitely left, we're going to get points on our line. So that's where the left end of negative infinity comes in. That means we can plug in any x value, 0 or less than 0. And if we look to the right, as we go to the right on the x-axis, we can plug in increasingly greater numbers till we get to infinity. And no matter what we plug in, we're going to get values on our line. So the domain for this function, a linear function, would be negative infinity to positive infinity. So then now if we look at what we're getting out along the y-axis, so we're looking up and down now, do we get points at 0? And yes, we get a point at 0 along the y-axis, which is here. And we get points greater than that. So if we're looking up along the y-axis, 0 is here, and we've got points going up to infinity. And if we look down along the y-axis, as we go down this way, we've got points going down. So there are points to negative infinity. So the default range is also all real numbers or negative infinity to positive infinity. So we can plug any number in for x, and we can get any number out for y. Let's take a look at a different function. Let's look at an absolute value function. So now, let's say we've got this function here. And we'll copy that over. So now, we'll say that this is 2 along the x-axis, and we'll say that that is 1 along the y-axis. So now, if we look at 0, 0 is always a good starting point along the x-axis, so here's your x-axis. We've got a value or a point on our graph. So it can be 0. We've got points going to the left, so we can plug in any x value to the left of 0, and we're going to keep getting points along our graph. So we can get negative infinity along the x-axis. And if we go to the right, we're going to keep getting points along our graph. It's going to keep going forever to the right, which means we've got negative infinity to positive infinity for our domain. So we can plug in any x value to get some y value out. So then now let's look at the output, or the y values. If we plug in 2 here, notice we get this point, which is our vertex. So that would be the point at 2, 1. So if we plug in 2 along the y-axis, the lowest point we get is 1. It never drops below 1 on the y-axis. So there's our low point. And if we look down here now, there's no part of the graph that drops below that line. So this is y equals 1. So that's the line that goes through 1 along the y-axis, and it never drops below that. We don't see any points on our graph, our absolute value graph, below that line y equals 1. So no matter what we plug in for x, we can plug in numbers to negative infinity. We're going to get points above that line. If we plug in points towards positive infinity, so points on the x-axis greater than 0, we're going to get points forever, but they're still all going to be above that line y equals 1. So our domain here wouldn't be all real numbers. It would be 1 to infinity. And then interval notation, we use brackets and parentheses. That's a whole different discussion. But we're never going to get any y values below 1 on the y-axis. So the thing with domain and range, we have to remember that domain is always looking at x values along the x-axis to see what we can plug in, whereas range, we're looking at values along the y-axis that we get out. And in this case, all of the y values are starting at 1 along the y-axis and going up to infinity.